In 536 AD, a shroud fell upon the world. The sun, a weak ember in the sky, cast shadows like faint whispers. That chilling year, summer snow veiled parched fields, and a seasonless bite hung in the air. Farmers watched helplessly as crops withered, and hunger, an uninvited guest, haunted every table. Desperate hands tore at bark and weeds, seeking to fill the void. Empires crumbled, dreams of conquest dissolved. Whispers of a lurking plague spread through hushed firesides, and a question echoed through time. Could this truly be the world's end? In a fragmented Europe, a realm of whispers, deceit, and clashing swords, we embark on a journey into an era where power was a fickle coin and loyalty as fragile as the finest chainmail. Tumultuous times marked by perpetual warfare and shifting allegiances saw monarchs, once anchored by feudal bonds, navigate treacherous currents as traditional loyalties frayed. Into this breach stepped the mercenaries, not simple saviors, but pragmatic warriors amidst treachery and opportunity. Amidst the political maelstrom, the rise of mercenaries was inevitable. As kingdoms and empires clashed, seeking advantage on an ever-evolving chessboard of alliances and hostilities, their role became crucial. These men, less bound by noble chivalry and more swayed by the glint of gold and silver, traded steadfast devotion for purchasable allegiance. Their swords were tempered by the clamor of coin, not the crown. Diverse backgrounds led men to mercenary ranks. Some, of noble birth, sought redemption through battlefield prowess. Others, commoners escaping agrarian toil, were lured by tales of honor and riches along bloodied paths of war. Such stories hummed with eerie melodies of valor and betrayal, a language of survival spoken through steel, suited for an era where kings feared mercenaries as much as they trusted them. As feudal economies struggled to keep pace with currency-driven warfare, kings dipped into treasuries paying in gold, not merely land, for service. With money as the primary enabler, a new class of pragmatic warriors emerged, unbound by land, pledged instead to the fortunes of warlords with the deepest pockets. This fostered alliances more fluid than ever before. Fortunes were won or lost not solely by strategy or valor, but through alliances purchased via a glittering stream of gold. Introducing transactional strategies altered the landscape of loyalty and war. Mercenaries epitomized this fragility. Their fealty was limited to contractual ties, which could unravel at the slightest economic shift or the whisper of richer promises from opposing factions. Families battling for supremacy employed their might, acutely aware of the fleeting nature of hired soldiers. Each new allegiance brought the potential for both glory and devastation. Mercenaries, wandering blades for hire, carried an enigmatic air into and out of campaigns. Unlike knights, their honor derived not from noble lineage, but from the shrewd application of martial skill and survival instincts. Outlaws and outcasts, they traversed lands with equal parts of valor and cunning. Their reputation for ruthless efficiency was matched by inherent adaptability, granting them access to more advanced weaponry than their feudal counterparts and leveraging it through guerrilla tactics or sweeping charges across blood-slick battlefields. Their equipment, a formidable array of swords, axes, and pikes, accoutrements for close combat and full battlefield engagement, spoke of lives lived in pragmatic armament. Their armor, often pieced together from pilfered parts and adapted through trade, became the robust protection needed to wade through chaos and carnage, becoming extensions of each man's will to endure. Peril extended beyond the battlefield. As emissaries of contested domains, their lives were marked as much by periods of rest as by combat. When not engaged in battle, these warriors populated transient camps, echoing with tales of victory and loss, punctuated by the ephemeral camaraderie fostered by such liminal lifestyles. Fireside stories became their binding currency, threads weaving them into fleeting networks of shared trials and tribulations. The consequences wrought by these adaptable warriors rippled across courts and battlefields. Conflicts extended unexpectedly as mercenary allegiance remained as negotiable as the disputes themselves, often prolonging warfare that might otherwise have resolved. Chroniclers often denounced them as rapacious marauders, driven solely by exploitation and shifting power balances. Yet they overlooked the strategic evolutions they forced upon Europe's military minds. The introduction of mercenaries dramatically influenced armed engagements, shifting from reliance on traditional feudal levies toward armies supplemented by financially motivated forces. These advancements foreshadowed the structured inevitability of standing armies, a historical echo of lessons learned from mercenary flexibility and innovation. Even as dedicated armies emerged long after mercenaries ceased to dominate the military landscape, their legacy deeply influenced the strategic calculations of future conflicts as vectors of adaptability and foresight in an age dictated by necessity. Their roles were enshrined in history's chronicles, for they embodied the nuanced complexities of loyalty, power, and survival, sculpting a narrative of medieval Europe alongside familiar tales of valor and chivalric honor, a narrative punctuated by the indelible mark of the sword for hire. In the shifting sands of medieval Europe, the concept of a landless knight was once an anomaly. Yet as feudal obligations crumbled under political turmoil and economic upheaval, knights found themselves dispossessed of their ancestral lands. Stripped of their holdings, these warriors faced a crossroads, fade into obscurity as commoners or seek fortune on the battlefield. Here, amidst the clouds of war, many chose a new path, transforming from feudal vassals into mercenaries. No longer bound by land or loyalty, they became warriors for hire, offering skills to the highest bidder, embarking on a cutthroat journey of entrepreneurship in war-torn Europe. Freed from traditional feudal duties, these knights embraced mercenary life as proto-capitalists, trading martial prowess for coin. This newfound independence was both risky and intoxicating, allowing them to navigate political labyrinths for personal gain, challenging the very hierarchies that once constrained them. Here they dismantled the old order, forging a path where skill, adaptability, and negotiation shaped status more than birthright. For disgraced lords, a different story unfolded. Cast aside by power struggles or military failures, the battlefield offered redemption. Armed with strategic acumen and leadership skills surpassing most, the field of war became their domain of second chances, a place where valor could be redeemed and fortunes rebuilt. They would no longer find their way back to power through inheritance or diplomatic favors. Contracts and battles became their means of reclaiming lost prestige. Meanwhile, peasants driven by desperation through medieval chaos found unique opportunities to elevate their station. With little more than ambition, they shed the shackles of poverty and entered the mercenary world, where social boundaries blurred and grit and tenacity became their currency. The battlefield transformed from a zone of subjugation into one of opportunity, allowing these individuals to carve out new identities in a brutal hierarchy defined by coin and combat. As warfare evolved, so too did the business of mercenary life. It became a disciplined, lucrative trade, a market where martial skills were commodities and reputation was as valuable as skill with a sword. Successful mercenaries, their senses honed for battle and negotiation, rose to command respect and riches, weaving themselves into the fabric of medieval conflicts. For those with foresight beyond mere survival, warfare offered not just income, but a ladder to power, where cunning became as essential as swordsmanship. The economic allure of this path was irresistible. Mercenaries quickly grasped the necessity of strategic financial awareness, negotiating every clause of their contracts with meticulous care. Warfare, once chaotic, now mirrored entrepreneurial ventures, each contract a blend of strategy, risk, and reward. This short-lived prosperity, however, was a double-edged sword, teetering between affluence and destitution as contracts ended. Some wisely invested earnings, buying land or securing titles, a testament to their knack for leveraging war as an economic stepping stone. Though mercenaries lived by an ostensibly honorless trade, personal reputation was paramount. A dependable warhound earned high pay and favor. Thus, personal honor became their most valuable asset. These unwritten codes, forged in necessity's crucible, governed their actions more than any knightly code. In this volatile world, a reliable name translated into job security and better contracts, ensuring survival and success. In the fringes of the battlefield, mercenaries formed vibrant, transient communities. These camps were not barren encampments, but lively microcosms animated by song, dance, and shared tales. Here, roles shifted fluidly, with some mercenaries becoming master negotiators or cunning artisans within their mobile societies. As these communities migrated across Europe, they became melting pots of diverse customs, exchanging traditions and weaving a rich tapestry of collective culture. Negotiating mercenary contracts was a delicate art, mirroring diplomatic treaties. With futures hinging on fine print, mercenaries honed skills in languages, diplomacy, and tactical negotiation. Successful mercenaries built networks spanning local powers and former enemies, leveraging these alliances for security and prosperity. With each cleverly brokered contract, they carved pathways through chaos, mastering the intricate balance of military prowess and political savvy. The mystique surrounding mercenaries permeated medieval literature, embedding them in popular imagination. Chroniclers immortalized their tales, bold adventures, shrewd negotiations, and cautionary sagas of betrayal. As legends portrayed mercenaries as quintessential rogue warriors, they became symbols of a rapidly evolving world. These contradictions inspired countless ballads, blending admiration and weariness, capturing both spectrums of mercenary life. Thus, they left a dual legacy, illustrious yet ominous. They were the prism through which both respect and wariness were refracted. Revered for their critical roles, but also reminders of humanity's penchant for conflict, these mercenaries carved enduring tales into history. With each sword they wielded, they indelibly influenced how warfare intersected with commerce and ambition, etching another chapter in the human narrative intertwining might and mind. The 14th century French landscape was a land of turmoil, setting the stage for the emergence of anarchic yet organized military bands known as the Free Companies. Composed of soldiers left jobless when wars ended and peace treaties were hastily signed, these groups found their place in a world still thirsty for conflict. They were not random marauders. Rather, they adhered to a loose code of conduct, maintained hierarchies, and bore emblems offering a semblance of order. Though free from any monarch's command, they thrived on the irony that their freedom relied on the perpetual need for violence, embodying the raw economic reality of their time. The Great Company was a formidable force within this chaotic ecosystem. It assembled thousands of seasoned warriors from the ruinous remains of campaigns across Italy and France. Their banners were warnings of impending devastation as they maneuvered with power independent of any state. These mercenaries blurred lines between official armies and organized terror, brandishing loyalty enforced by strength and carving their own path amid the ravages of the period. The Great Company was adept at playing employers like a skilled gambler, balancing promises of might with demands for substantial ransoms and privileges usually reserved for the elite. Their existence questioned traditional power structures, proving even chaos could wield a crown when sufficiently orchestrated. In contrast, the White Company distinguished itself through discipline and strategic brilliance. Commanded by the astute Sir John Hawkwood, they operated with precision rather than pillage. They forged legends not through random acts, but through calculated tactical supremacy. Their battles were not mere displays of brute power. They were master classes in military innovation. Swift cavalry charges and adept use of the longbow turned them into a formidable force. Renowned among warring Italian city-states for their almost surgical disassembly of opponents, their name invited both dread and reluctant respect. Their tactics revealed an essential truth about mercenaries. Controlled terror offered ripe opportunities for political gain. The commanders behind these free companies were tacticians who discarded traditional doctrines for ingenuity. They curated strategies including lightning raids and strategic retreats, always calculated with profit in mind. To them, each battlefield was not just a site of combat, but a stage for negotiation, where wit measured just as mighty as the sword. Such strategic foresight allowed them to secure wealth and favor long after the dust settled. They were war entrepreneurs who turned brutality into a high-stakes chess game where alliances could be severed as quickly as they were formed and allegiances whispered like rumors in the wind. Economically, these mercenaries showcased the volatile nature of war as business. Payment was critical, yet precariously dependent on continued military engagements or the unsettling currency of fear. When coins stopped flowing, they would extort, pillage, and seize, showing a cunning understanding of feudal economics, where the cost was calculated not just in gold, but in blood. Rulers found themselves facing the dual threats of relying on these unpredictable allies while being haunted by the thought of their capricious loyalties. The mercenary economy mirrored the era's broader landscape. using brute force to redefine the rules of engagement. Life in a free company was arduous yet orderly. Constant movement underscored their existence, driven by the unyielding need for new employers and resources. The mix of various nationalities within these bands fostered a strange camaraderie, where knights swapped courtly rituals for the harsh realities of life on the edge. Survival outweighed birthright, creating a culture that sang to its own chaotic rhythm. They lived amidst stark realities where resources were more vital than gold. Jokes were veiled in dark humor, and companionship occasionally offered solace amid the tumult of war. In the arena of politics, mercenaries moved beyond simple soldiers to become key players in medieval geopolitics. Their fluid loyalties became pivots in the unstable games of power, where kings and churchmen alike sought mercenary blades to turn the tides of influence. Successful leaders were not only military strategists, but skilled political players who effectively negotiated favorable terms and pitted adversaries against one another to procure advantage. This labyrinthine landscape turned typical political structures into a shadowy theater where mercenaries without allegiance to land or lineage played palpable roles in shaping political outcomes. The ethics within these bands diverged from traditional chivalry, yet adhered to their own practical codes. While not bound by nobility's moral expectations, they enforced an internal order grounded in survival. Loyalty among peers was honored. Betrayal met with stringent punishment. Acts of mercy or discipline punctuated their engagements, highlighting humanity amid the chaos. And their pragmatic honor mediated relationships even when the lines of morality blurred under the sword's shadow. Through their turbulent existence, mercenaries etched an indelible mark on society, boldly intertwining with the histories of those they fought for and against. They became facilitators of political stability and instigators of new conflicts, weaving threads of dependence and resistance through towns and feasting halls alike. History remembers them not just for their tumultuous deeds, but as harbingers of newer forms of warfare that would eventually pave the way for standing armies. The free companies illuminated paths toward organized military might, laying subtle foundations for the states and conflicts of the future. Their legacy echoed far beyond medieval battlefields, signifying that in the games of war and politics, money often speaks louder than crowns. In the medieval tapestry, mercenaries found themselves lured by the brilliance of gold, a shimmering promise that captivated their desires and necessities alike. Gold was a siren call more than mere greed. It was a lifeline in a world where survival was as uncertain as the next meal. It offered a shield against the whims of fate that could cast one from riches to rags with the flutter of a pennant. Along the muddy byways and bloody battlefields, the quest for gold united the disgraced knight seeking redemption, the ambitious peasant yearning for more, and the daring souls hungry for riches beyond their familiar horizons. Each hard-won coin, tarnished with sweat and blood, spoke of a daring gamble, caught between prosperity and peril. Yet the promises of gold often crumbled like ash in the wind. Contracts were signed with grand assurances of payment from kings and lords, but the harsh realities of medieval warfare left many mercenaries grasping at smoke. Payment was elusive, delays were frequent, promises reneged, and this transformed hopeful aspirations into bitter hunger. The life between contracts was stark and desperate, the gilded dreams quickly fading to a fight for bare existence. Left stranded on the chessboard of power, unpaid mercenaries turned to dark means of survival. Extortion, grimy, unchecked, and rife with resentment became their tool. Villages caught in the crossfire of mercenary desperation and noble neglect offered up their harvests and meager prosperity in the hope of sparing their homes from torch and sword. The fine line delineating professional soldier from marauding bandit blurred like rain-soaked ink. In times of peace, mercenaries prowled the land, wavering between freelancers and fiends. Reputation hinged on survival rather than honor, as they roamed with fear as their shadow. The threat they posed was genuine, fueled not by malice but necessity. Pillage was not anarchy, but a methodical approach to sustenance, sparing resources for future exploits in a grim reciprocity of survival. For rulers, the promise of mercenary service was both boon and bane, an ambivalent dance on the stage of power. Contracts glistened with gold for those with means, But an empty vault quickly turned regal promises into tales fraught with myth. Kings entranced by the siren song of conquest often found their ambitions outpacing their treasuries. New taxes were levied, church artifacts melted, all in the frenzied pursuit of gold to pay their armies. But wars devoured resources faster than they could be replenished, and unpaid mercenaries, embittered, often laid siege to those they'd once served, thrusting the realm into chaos. Mercenaries became masters of adaptation, forging new paths through the erratic landscape of war and peace. They diversified like medieval entrepreneurs, leveraging their martial prowess into varied services beyond simple warfare. During lulls in combat, they engaged in policing, raiding, and escorting merchants across perilous territories. These ventures were not deviations, but clever extensions of their deadly trade, a testament to their resilience and strategic finesse. Yet plundering, grim as it was, paid dividends. With wages fleeting faster than discarded banners, mercenaries turned to it as a steadfast means, weaving devastation into routine. They targeted the vulnerable, bypassing defenses to strip wealth with visceral efficiency. Villagers buried treasures or fled with frantic tenacity, knowing that survival lay in objects and coin, each marketable good a temporary talisman. Their dealings were rife with the potential for corruption, a battlefield of ink and deceit where both kings and soldiers engaged in a dangerous dance of pen and sword. Contracts forged bonds of necessity and distrust, better known for their loopholes than their binding strength. Mercenaries, ever pragmatic, exploited these with cunning precision, while kings, wary of retribution, navigated a path as treacherous as any battlefield. In the ranks of the restless, the threat of desertion loomed large, an art practiced by many who gauged loyalty by the weight of gold, not fealty. A call to better prospects rang out over campfires, whispers of discontent breeding revolt. Bands dissolved overnight, leaving behind strategic voids and a cauldron of resentment. This self-serving guile, cloaked with bold determination, spoke of a resilience that refused to bow to circumstance. Mercenaries existed in a paradox of dependence and distrust, a pillar in the fortress of competition, yet never truly embraced. Kings placed lives in the hands of hired swords, yet viewed them with lingering suspicion. This ambivalent dance of strategy and reservation wound itself through campaigns, trust existing as a mere transaction, always measured, never innocent. Their legacy, woven from glory and infamy alike, tells tales of man's enduring struggle against fate. These warriors, once hailed as triumphal harbingers, were as easily cast as agents of chaos. Their deeds, inscribed in history's parchment, speak as much of carnage as cunning and adaptation. As gates lifted in post-medieval times, the shadows of mercenaries morphed into the enduring echoes of soldiers for hire, a dark testament that war speaks the language of coin more than creed. And even amidst chaos, some semblance of order remains. In the patchwork of Renaissance Italy, where city-states wrestled for power like squabbling siblings, emerged a new class of soldier, the condottieri. Unlike the rampaging mercenaries of France and Germany, these warlords donned silk as much as armor, blending martial prowess with sharp political finesse. The Italian term condotta signaled their business, binding contracts that mirrored diplomatic treaties with stipulations as clear-cut as a modern employment agreement. To be a condottiere was more than bearing arms. It was mastering the game of alliances and enmities that stitched the Italian tapestry. They hailed from noble or knightly stock, educated in the ways of both war and whimsy. As the sun set on the Middle Ages and Renaissance dawned, Italy, dotted with independent city-states like Florence and Venice, needed force without the ruinous expense of standing armies. Here, the condottieri found their niche, offering cities the chance to punch above their weight in the Italian arena. These mercenaries were not merely fighters, but diplomats, shifting allegiances as unpredictably as the tides. Their contracts not only secured payment, but also detailed troop levels, campaign duration, and rules for spoils. Thus, they turned potential warfare into a chess match favoring cunning over carnage. Enter legends like Francesco, who, without unsheathing his sword, parlayed his way to become the Duke of Milan by courting alliances like a maestro toying with notes. Unlike their northern European counterparts, lustful for battle glory, Condottieri preferred the art of war over its brutality. Why face costly battles with potential loss of life and political fallout when one could win without lifting a blade? They embraced the adage that wars are won not through fights, but through making those fights unnecessary. This approach peeled back the popular image of mercenaries fueled solely by greed. Their reputation was built on strategic wizardry, a skill far more lucrative than swords or gold. Yet loyalty for these Italian warlords was as fluid as the ink in their contracts. Allegiances shifted with the contents of a purse. The Italian landscape, alive with shifting alliances, proved fertile for those who could revise their loyalties as swiftly as today's stock fluctuations. This might seem fickle by modern standards, but it was sheer pragmatism in an era where today's ally could be tomorrow's foe. Contracts anticipated defections, entwining stipulations to deter betrayal. Though clever condottieri often saw these as navigable challenges rather than barriers, the business of war was their playing field. Negotiating intricate contracts required diplomatic flair alongside martial skill. The condottieri were as comfortable negotiating in palatial quarters as on Italy's verdant fields. Their ability to shape terms reflected a profound understanding of contemporary politics. They were not mere warriors, but cultivators of influence, threading themselves into the fabric of cities with all the reverence of a Roman senator. These shifting masters of strategy often emerged as heroes when the coin landed them on the winning side. Towns feted them as saviors from sieges, but never forgot that their allegiance was a precarious dance, always judged against a coin's weight. This dual role, savior and threat, was laden with irony. When a condottiere planted roots, climbing from hired blade to noble estate, it often painted them as larger-than-life figures, the stuff of folklore and song, capturing both the devastation caused by their whims and the mastery of their strategy. Their interaction with Renaissance culture also painted a complex picture. Some condottieri kept artists in their retinue like honored guests, serving as patrons of the arts with as much fervor as war, commissioning palaces and art to celebrate victories and peace alike. Gattamelata and Bartolomeo Colleone's equestrian statues bridge the realms of art and war, immortalizing their martial achievements in bronze, and proving that just as their swords could conquer, their patronage could preserve. Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince was a reflection on a landscape painted by condottieri, their tactics embodying a pragmatism that turned moral compasses upside down. Far from historical footnotes, these warlords were Machiavelli's real-life archetypes of power unshackled by conscience. Still, as they divided city-states through battle, condottieri unintentionally nudged Italy toward unity. When faced with powerful mercenaries, cities that had warred since memory began found alliances over mutual antagonism, sowing seeds of collaboration, even in adversity. Thus, while their swords divided, the specter of their actions sowed unseen unity. Yet the sun set on the condottieri as Europe's military makeup shifted towards standing armies. Caught in the wake of gunpowder and political consolidation, their battlefield relevance faded. Their legacy, however, persists in the shadowy echoes of modern military contractors, the progenitors of strategic foresight and opportunism, reminding us that the price of service, then as now, weighs heaviest on the scales of power. Imagine the cool, crisp air of the Swiss Alps, where the clang of armor and the prayers of men readying for battle give way to the eerie calm before a storm. Here, in this rugged haven, a new soldier was born, the Swiss pikemen, originally farmers who wielded pikes longer than a man, not only fending off marauding knights, but also changing the nature of warfare itself. These men, driven by survival and pride, honed their skills amidst the constant threat of invasion. The pike, or a deceptively simple spear, became their formidable ally, capable of piercing the armored glory of a charging knight from a safe distance. Yet it wasn't just their weapon that set them apart, but a fierce communal spirit that refused to shatter in adversity. The Swiss Confederation, a patchwork of cantons held together by shared necessity, witnessed a rapid transformation at the hands of these soldiers. Victories at places like Morgarten and Sempak whispered across the continent, tales of disciplined columns of men bringing mighty steeds and their noble riders to ruin. Gone were the chaotic hordes of other mercenaries. In their place stood methodical ranks that echoed the sturdy unity of their mountainous home. They fought not as pawns in feudal schemes, but as cohesive units, a Gewalthaufen, their brotherhood born from shared plots of land in a communal destiny. Picture these peasant warriors in fierce, disciplined phalanx formations that stood immovable like a hedgehog, bristling with ranks of metal spikes. This iron formation was their signature, unflinching in defense, relentless in its advance, turning the once feared cavalry charge into an ill-fated rush towards certain doom. Ancient tactics met the deadly innovation of their time, transforming battles into finely orchestrated performances where success wasn't just possible, but assured. Even as chaos brewed, their drill and discipline bore fruits, unlike the opportunistic raiders of other mercenary bands. Yet as the Swiss pike legend grew, it attracted the gaze of Europe's power players. Princes and kings far from this alpine cradle were so impressed that they opened coffers to hire these men to battlefields across the continent. Swiss soldiers abandoned plots for coin, crossing distances to fight battles far outside their valleys. Despite inevitably becoming embroiled in foreign wars, the connection to their homeland remained unyielding. In between campaigns, they returned to till fields, weaving agriculture with warfare into an unexpected thread of life. In 1339, at the Battle of Laupen, the pikemen's mettle faced one of its fiercest tests, the rumbling charge of Europe's finest cavalry, driven by feudal vengeance, met the stoic embrace of aligned Swiss ranks. They stood stoically against the onslaught, each man knowing his place, each pike glistening with the assurance of well-honed strategy. Their victory that day signified something far more significant than any single battle. It was the sound of an old world's last stand. But as time marched inexorably on, so too did the ways of war. Gunpowder began showing its ruthless efficiency, spitting lead into ordered ranks once thought impenetrable. Firearms began to eclipse pikes as the tool of choice. Meanwhile, other mercenary bands like the German Landsknechts emerged, cleverly combining shot and pike. These new demands left the Swiss struggling to keep up as over-reliance on tradition led them slowly toward obscurity. Even as their prominence faded from the battlefield, the tales of Swiss courage and cunning never wavered. Generations recounted their defiance, narrating stories of an indomitable spirit that had cast off noble chains, a spirit as free as their mountain winds. Art and literature celebrated their exploits, while festive marches echoed the disciplined cadence of their past victories. Their legend grew alongside the sense of independence, fueling the fire that would see Switzerland embrace a life of neutrality, a complete evolution from combative origins. The Swiss pikemen left more than echoes. They became a model of transformation. Their insistence on organized infantry over scattered knightly valor redefined military theory. They quietly taught nations to shift from extravagant chivalry toward thoughtful strategy, paving the way for centralized armies rooted in discipline rather than birthright. Empires would rise by their inspiration, yet their shadows remain, proof of what valor woven with strategy was capable of achieving. So as you envision these soldiers standing atop a mist-laden field, pikes alight in the morning sun, remember their story isn't just a relic, it's the genesis of modern warfare, rooted in Swiss soil, springing from farmers with an uncanny knack for turning dire necessity into revolutionary innovation. The echoes of their formations longer resonate through history's chambers, a whispered reminder that sometimes those who change the world begin with hands holding nothing more than a simple spear. And thus, the clinking of Swiss pikes against impenetrable armor signaled the death knell of the medieval knight and opened the door for the rise of the disciplined soldier. In the dim corners of medieval Europe, where coins clinked and promises were as fragile as the tapestries gracing noble halls, mercenaries walked a fine line between order and chaos. When the payments they were promised ran dry, these hired swords found themselves facing destitution in a world where loyalty was reserved for the highest bidder. Necessity, not choice, often drove these disciplined soldiers to embrace darker instincts, transforming into formidable warlords. With no coffers to sustain them and no lords willing to bear their cost, they turned to extortion and pillage, roaming the countryside with the air of undesired kings. Their swords became their currency, their notoriety a byproduct of necessity rather than mere greed. As they stepped beyond the bounds of contracts, mercenaries began claiming lands, forging their fiefs in the shadowy dance between desperation and ambition. Abandoned castles and strategic outposts became the new headquarters of burgeoning empires, filled with the acrid scent of smoke and whispers of deals made in dimly lit corners. It was a world where allegiance shifted as easily as the flicker of a candle flame. Positions once held for noble causes now served as power bases for burgeoning realms of unchecked authority. Some seized mighty castles, transforming these symbols of power into autonomous domains. What started as mere survival slowly evolved into organized enterprises of violence. And these mercenaries turned rogue-crafted kingdoms where the rule of the sword was absolute and chaos reigned supreme. Few stories better capture this essence than that of Bertrand du Guesclin, a mercenary whose cunning and manipulation earned him both dread and admiration. Born into French nobility, du Guesclin quickly turned his back on his roots, donning the armor of a soldier for hire. His journey from simple mercenary to feared and revered figure was marked by bold raids and strategies that could sway entire battles in his favor. Having built his reputation on a foundation of fear and respect, he leveraged his exploits, maneuvering between allegiances like a masterful chess player. His story reached its peak with the ransoming of Châteauneuf de Randon, where he extracted a handsome sum in exchange for sparing the city, propelling his campaigns further. For du Guesclin, this was more than a quest for wealth. It was an intricate dance of power, a testament to human nature's darker corners, where manipulation reigned supreme. Throughout medieval Europe, mercenaries who had once been hired soldiers crafted regions that, while not recognized states, functioned as mini-kingdoms driven by might and desperate necessity. Though fleeting, the existence of these domains revealed the fragility of established political orders. At the mercy of their tactical brilliance, these mercenaries rose from mere soldiers to hold sway as rulers, their land supported by military might rather than noble entitlement. Some of these rogue leaders ruled with a semblance of order, while others embraced brutality. Yet they all faced the inevitable truth that their power rested on a foundation of sand, shifting as quickly as the loyalty that had once defined their services. For many, the transition from battlefield tactician to ruler proved troublesome, their many kingdoms often succumbing to the very chaos that had fueled their rise. The tales of castles claimed by force speak to the audacity with which these mercenaries staked claims for power. These stone-headed fortresses became symbols of their newfound status, with military skills repurposed for siegecraft and occupation. Within these bastions, they dictated terms not just to commoners, but to the kings and nobility who had initially unleashed their potential. Yet the very presence of mercenaries holding influence within these fortresses stirred anxiety among traditional power structures as fear of their growing autonomy led to reprisals from those they had unsettled. Still, these audacious acts of claiming command over castles highlight how adeptly these men embodied their mercenary identity to overcome medieval narratives confined to noble bloodlines. In a world driven by alliances as fleeting as mist, treachery and betrayal became woven into the mercenary fabric, an accepted hazard in daily lives. These wandering warriors were free spirits, their loyalty dictated by coin rather than crowns. Alliances as fragile as a spider's web in a storm. When promises of payment vanished or better offers loomed, mercenaries turned sides with little more concern than a merchant exchanging goods. Their inclinations to betrayal reflected not treason, but the pragmatism of those for whom war was a livelihood, leading them into battles where yesterday's foe was today's ally. Yet as capricious as loyalties were, they also emerged as external catalysts amidst political climates, their allegiance shifts underpinning the delicate threads of medieval diplomacy. The echoes of a code like Cressy's offered a peculiar morality amid this volatile landscape, outlining a pragmatic ethos, balancing ambition and survival. It was an unwritten guide steering mercenary conduct, emphasizing tenets like honoring paid terms and pursuing owed spoils. Such a code, while pragmatic, underscored these warriors' controversial role, where chaos ensured survival on dark quests that threaded through medieval life. Mercenaries stood not only as mercenary villains, but as mirrors reflecting the unrefined realities of humanity. In shadowy exploits for gold, a stark reminder lingered. Chaos breeds opportunity, but without order, darkness prevails. In a time where religion wove through every thread of medieval existence, Mercenaries navigated a world where their creeds centered not around a king, country, or deity, but around currency. This wasn't simply a rejection of faith. Survival in their precarious profession meant adjusting the moral code they lived by. Mercenaries found themselves in the paradoxical role of being both reviled and relied upon by those who publicly decried their mercantile violence, yet quietly required their strategic prowess. The Church, in its struggle with such contradictions, condemned these soldiers of fortune as godless, while society itself depended on their swords to fill gaps left by armies bound to feudal duties and dwindling royal budgets. As some mercenaries moved across the continent, they faced accusations of moral bankruptcy. Yet their detachment from religious doctrine shouldn't be mistaken for a lack of ethical consideration. Many drew personal lines, sometimes refusing contracts to desecrate sacred sites or choosing to uphold some semblance of morality in a chaotic world. This balance between serving own interests and maintaining a sliver of ethical integrity reveals a nuanced perspective of mercenary life, one where faith and survival coexisted, though in a constant state of tension. Their existence wasn't solely about earning coins. It involved an unspoken tally of guilt and moral debt. Stories of mercenary atrocities, sometimes exaggerated but often painfully true, pervaded medieval life. They painted mercenaries as harbingers of chaos, feared and loathed, yet at times admired for brutal efficiency. Prone to introspection amid war's chaos, mercenaries often wrestled with the haunting specter of deeds. For those who grappled with the moral repercussions of actions, the blood price was more than just a cost paid in battle, but a debt that weighed heavily on conscience. When the sword met the cross, sacred sites bore witness to mercenary conflicting loyalties. The riches hidden within monasteries, though sanctified, were irresistible in times of dire need. Such raids were lauded and condemned in equal measure, exposing the heart of medieval society's moral quandary. Worldly survival often trumped spiritual salvation. Yet not all mercenaries treated holy sites with disdain. Some held them in reverence, refusing acts of sacrilege. This duality hints at an internal struggle between faith and necessity. Despite mercenary lifestyle being largely secular, redemption was a pursuit many did not shy away from. In a world where religion provided structure and refuge, mercenaries sought ways to reconcile pasts. Almsgiving, penance, or pilgrimages to holy sites like Santiago de Compostela became common paths for those seeking redemption. These efforts intertwined temporal pursuits with spiritual salvation, portraying mercenaries as complex individuals striving for something greater than immediate survival. Even the Church, stern in its proclamations against mercenaries, wasn't immune to pragmatism, employing skilled warriors during turmoil or threat. Bishops and popes, bound by the harsh realities of war-era politics, viewed mercenaries as essential despite secular motivations. This reluctant alliance illustrates the pragmatic flexibility characterizing the medieval ecclesiastical landscape, where spiritual doctrines occasionally yielded to worldly needs. The Church's pragmatic employment of mercenaries highlights unresolved tensions between piety and practicality, raising questions about morality and necessity. Honor among mercenaries was a curious amalgam of battlefield reputation and personal integrity. Bound not by chivalric ideals but by pragmatism, their honor was defined by contracts and mutual interest, word as binding as any noble decree. This unexpected code of integrity sometimes clashed with religious morals, highlighting mercenary role as navigators of a world where honor wasn't monolithic, but rather shifted to fit unique existence. Living in a landscape akin to organized chaos, mercenaries were forced to reconcile the dualities of faith and power. Venturing into territories where those lines blurred, church alliances often underscored this tension, blending secular expediency with spiritual necessity. These unholy alliances captured the paradoxical nature of both mercenary and ecclesiastical existence in the medieval world, highlighting the fluid morality of the era. Ultimately, mercenaries serve as mirrors reflecting a medieval landscape rife with contradictions. Narratives offer insights into the delicate balance between faith and survival. In negotiating the dichotomy between necessity and morality, mercenaries remind us of the enduring complexity of human existence, where the quest for meaning continues to dance with survival. Legacy is not merely one of gold and glory, but an indelible reflection of the moral configurations and ethical complexities underpinning human choice across ages. In the chaotic tableau of the Hundred Years' War, mercenaries were not mere pawns, but pivotal players, altering tides and tipping scales. The fields of Europe became their stage, where Sir John Hawkwood and his ilk danced between allegiances with a dexterity born of necessity and greed. These seasoned warriors, each bound by no vow but to purse, were summoned to fields like Poitiers, where strategic acumen earned England a stunning victory and a captured king. Presence was nothing short of terrifying for adversaries, demonstrating mercenary, brutal effectiveness in a war as much about control as about crown and title. Yet the cost was high. English coffers were stretched to breaking, but hired hands remained an indispensable evil, carving legacies in blood-soaked earth of a dynastic dispute. As Eastern and Western worlds collided, mercenaries again found themselves wielding influence at the Siege of Constantinople in 1453. Here, Giovanni Giustiniani, a Genoese engineer, fortified Byzantine hopes against Sultan Mehmed II's Ottoman forces. Mercenaries on both sides exchanged loyalty for payment and knowledge for survival, a testament to the opportunistic professionalism that blurred cultural boundaries. The Theodosian walls, bastion of Byzantine pride, faced doom under the relentless cannon devised by mercenaries turned architects of own history. Byzantine reliance on foreign experts underscored vulnerabilities, merging desperation with grim resilience. Meanwhile, Ottoman forces, aided by Western engineers, shattered traditions alongside stonework, marking a pivotal point in history, not through sheer force, but through mercenary ingenuity. The Swiss mercenaries, adorned in straightforward yet deadly formations, altered combat tactics forever. Ascending from humble beginnings, they wielded pikes taller than foes, bringing a farmer's quiet precision to the battlefield. In battles like Morgarten, they decimated aristocratic might of knights, proving infantry had come of age. As these mercenaries ventured beyond Swiss environs, they attracted patronage from highest bidders, including the ambitious French crown. Disciplined ranks could turn away cavalry charges, standing as powerful testimonies to the shifting nature of warfare. Nations were coerced, often reluctantly, into emulating strategies. Contracts with Swiss soldiers became a symbol of power and prestige. The Swiss mercenaries, manipulators of pike and reputation alike, shaped a new reality, one where gold and military mastery coalesced to rewrite battlefield doctrines and diminish the era of the chivalric knight. Amidst the perils of disease and enduring conflict in 14th century France, the free companies rose to prominence and chaos. Bands like the Grandes Compagnies and the Great Company thrived in the anarchy, moving with the tides of coin and destruction. Rogue soldiers and opportunistic veterans formed these companies, exploiting political flux to reshape medieval French society. Presence was a strategic nightmare for rulers who either hired them to forestall further devastation or succumb to pillaging schemes. The free companies were more than mercenaries. They crafted a new doctrine of warfare. Their mere existence shifted power with ruthless efficiency, dictating terms and forcing rulers to dance a mercenary jig of diplomacy and iron. Meanwhile, Italy saw the emergence of the condottieri, warfare's cunning entrepreneurs. Figures like Francesco Sforza transitioned from battlefield prowess to political dominance, shifting allegiances at the clink of a coin. Theirs was a warfare transfigured into business, contracts sealed with legalese and potential treachery. Condottieri exploited terms to ascend into nobility, turning the theater of war into stages of negotiation and civic plotting. Italy's fractured polity provided fertile ground for leaders who maneuvered through military and socio-political landscapes as they redefined combat tactics and governance itself. Across the British Isles, mercenary traditions found new life in the Marcher Lords. These frontier warriors commanded allegiance through cultural cleverness. Guided only by royal whispers, they personified the mercenary ethos, blending governance with frontline tenacity during Welsh and Scottish skirmishes. Figures like the Mortimers gained land and leverage, exhibiting the adaptability and opportunism synonymous with mercenary tradition. Marcher lords held sway over lore and warfare in unique borderland fiefdoms, showcasing mercenary influences' reach into societal fabrics. The Landsknechts emerged from the heart of the Holy Roman Empire as epitomes of martial innovation, merging pike formations with flamboyant flair. Their combination of artistry and discipline shifted European military horizons, demonstrating how strategy and striking presence could redefine warfare. The Landsknechts illustrated adaptability in campaigns such as at Pavia, proving that mercenary tradition was as much about aesthetic as tactical evolution. In the Balkans, the Stratioti cavalry operated under Venetian employ, their guerrilla tactics regulating both Eastern and Western confrontations. These fighters were adept in terrain-dictated warfare, shaping engagements beyond typical battlefields into moments of surprise and mastery. By combating Ottoman encroachments and carrying out strategic raids, the Stratioti highlighted mercenary roles as both barriers to empires and innovators of tactical diversity. Culminating this narrative, the White Company under Sir John Hawkwood stands as a testament to how mercenaries like Hawkwood could manipulate military necessity for personal and political advantage. The White Company's exploits showcased warfare's brutality underlined by strategic foresight in Italy. Amid shifting allegiances, they became artisans of chaos and order, wielding the mercenary sword as a tool of ancient diplomacy and a precursor to modern statecraft, illuminating a path where combat savvy could intersect with sovereign conquest. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, the mercenaries' reign over the battlefield began to wane, much like the softening glow of an extinguishing torch. The emergence of standing armies marked this transition, fueled by national identities that solidified during tumultuous centuries of conflict. The once dominant mercenaries found themselves shadowed by soldiers, bound by loyalty to states rather than the jingle of coin. A shift as slow as it was inevitable. This change wasn't merely organizational, it was intricately woven into the fabric of economic realities. Centralized governments with the growing capability to levy taxes nurtured permanent forces capable of defending and expanding state interests with greater precision and accountability. Yet even as they faded from medieval battlefields, mercenaries cast a lingering shadow, transforming rather than disappearing. The 16th and 17th centuries saw them reborn, not as sword-wielding knights, but as military contractors driven by new motives and masters. This metamorphosis pulled them into alliances not directly with kings, but under the flags of corporations, particularly those navigating the uncharted waters of new worlds. The mercenary spirit adapted to the ambitions of ventures like the East India Company, where private soldiers secured far-flung colonies, merging martial prowess with colonial appetites. In disguise, the allure of profit remained unyielding, underpinning new identity as antecedents of today's private military companies. Even as centralized standing armies became the norm, the demand for responsive and specialized military services persisted. Corporations during the age of exploration and expansion turned to private militias to safeguard burgeoning economic empires. Hired forces, no longer simple security details, often spearheaded conflicts driven less by flags than by fiscal ambitions, redefining battle not as a clash of nations, but as a contest for control over trade routes and resources. This symbiosis of military might and economic interest foreshadowed a world where warfare was as much about wealth as about valor, blurring lines between defense and aggression, and cementing the mercenary legacy in the expanding theater of global trade. Spanning centuries, mercenaries have exhibited a chameleon-like adaptability, navigating evolving demands of warfare. The 18th and 19th centuries required not just brawn, but brains. Those who understood the intricacies of new military technologies and strategies. This acuity saw mercenaries offering services beyond battlefields: intelligence, logistical support, and expertise in emerging warfare domains. Through these years, they proved resilient, transitioning through epochs from wielding swords to mastering cyber wars. Their role today has morphed into niche operations like cyber espionage, where precision and expertise often outmatch conventional military clout. Modern mercenaries, now often referred to as private military contractors, carry an ethos rooted in storied past, yet finely tuned to the present. Though operating under the scrutiny of complex legal systems, intrinsic values of flexibility, specialization, and profit endure. These mercenaries tread the delicate line between contractual obligation and personal ethics, bringing timeless questions of violence, loyalty, and morality into contemporary relevance. Amid skyscrapers and courtrooms, they remind society that while times have changed, underlying principles endure globally. The presence of mercenaries testifies to the timeless universality of craft. From tumultuous regions in Africa and the Middle East to political hotspots in Asia, influence echoes that of medieval counterparts, adapting to modern conflict demands while playing a pivotal role in shaping socio-political landscapes. While absent bounded chivalric codes of medieval Europe, modern warriors engage in a theater of global power shifts where nations and ideologies collide and commingle, continuing role as a disruptive force that simultaneously incites and resolves conflict. Yet with centuries of legacy comes controversy. Mercenaries have long-trodden paths lined with ethical conundrums, always in the crossfire of accountability debates. The rise of private military companies amplifies these discussions, with critics wary of operations slipping past international eyes, reminiscent of medieval fears of formidable yet fickle soldiers. Despite regulation attempts, they straddle a blurred line between legalities and ethical boundaries, underlining the ever-complex dynamics of sovereignty and security in a globalized era. True to medieval ancestors, today's mercenaries still operate where the smell of gunpowder mixes with the ink of contractual clauses, sitting at the crossroads of warfare's economy. Placed within the vast military-industrial complex reveals an enduring relevance to economic motivations driving conflict, showcasing consistent power of coin. As battles wage in boardrooms as much as on battlefields, the mercenary narrative demonstrates how economic forces have always shaped front lines, ensuring heritage remains tied to machinery of war. The public's enduring fascination with mercenaries surfaces across centuries, capturing imagination through tales of roguish charm interlaced with questionable motives. Portrayed in cultures and media as both saviors and scoundrels, dualistic existence captivates audiences who see them as heroes one moment and villains the next. Stories live on, bridging the divide between duty and desire in cultures everywhere, reflecting how deeply enigmatic presence is woven into the human story. As conflicts evolve, so too will the mercenaries who inhabit them, stepping into roles defined by technology and new warfare paradigms. In these uncharted territories, with swords long replaced by digital strategies, versatile warriors will enter ever new domains. With warfare stepping into novel arenas, the timeless allure remains. As long as there is both conflict and coin, those willing to trade skill for treasure will write new chapters in history. If you found this tale intriguing, subscribe to follow journeys through history's oddities and marvels.